Welcome everybody to another installment of the Recording Roundtable. My name is Todd Gilbert here in the back room. We have Jay James of Vehicle City Studios here with us.
Hello, hello.
And Anthony Lee from Flatlander Audio Recording.
Evening.
So guys, how's it going? How's this spring weather treating you?
I'm digging it. Tomorrow I'm going disc golfing all day.
Disc golfing? I've never actually done that before.
I do it probably too much.
Yeah, I got my kids this weekend. First time since quarantine that I get to actually have the kids, so it's going to be
oh wow,
that's fun.
Oh man, well because I'm immunocompromised, so when the quarantine happened, to be safe, because kids could have been carriers and never ever have any symptoms.
Right.
And so just to be on the safe side, I had to not have the kids for a while. But thank God for things like Zoom and FaceTime, and
right.
so we got to stay in communication and everything. But this will be the first weekend officially having them again, which is nice.
Sweet.
So we
Awesome,
thought today we would talk about workflow and things like that. How we approach a session or a mix or both, and some tricks, tips, maybe some things that we like to do. Because the one thing I've noticed about all three of us, which I think is very cool, is we all have very different approaches and different ways that we do things, but are all fantastic ways to do things. So
Right.
I think it's really cool to be able to present different sides of it and learn from each other as well.
Watch and relate.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So let's see. Anthony, you want to go ahead and start out? What is on a typical like let's start with recording. On a typical recording session, what is your approach?
All right. Well, usually usually it is a single that we tackle the first time I have a client, for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm usually in contact with them, for pre-production and stuff. I have them record a shitty cell phone quality demo of their song, and then from there I'll take some notes. I'll write down verse, the structure, my guesstimated BPM, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then from there, once the band gets there, usually we start with drums and scratch tracks with the guitars. Usually I kind of do those in tandem because I run 16 tracks at a time. So usually
nice.
I waste about 12 tracks on the drums. And then the other ones I
don't
use
know if I'd call it
wasting,
tracks. But...
right. So yeah, then
I'm biased. I'm a drummer, so I'm biased. So.
And then the other 4 tracks that I can run, I usually give to the guitarist, the bass player, and then if they really need it, I'll let the vocalist whisper in the corner somewhere. But they don't need the vocals. But yeah, I don't know if you want me to go in depth on how I mic the kit or anything. Or
I mean, if you want to, absolutely, yeah.
I have a definite approach because I run through Scarlett 18i20.
Scarlett's
that's
wonderful.
my main
interface. I've been looking into actually getting one.
They're super clean, and for the price, I feel like you can't get better preamps for your money. So
I've been looking at the what is it called, the Octapre?
Yep, I'm slaving an Octapre to my Scarlett 18i20. That's how I'm getting my 16 inputs.
Nice.
Yeah, that way I have 16 of the same, pretty much, sounding inputs, and if I want to add flavor, then I add some of my own extra preamps, and that's what I do for the kick drum usually, and for hi-hats. And also for the snares, I usually use a different preamp, which would be either my Pre-73 MK2s, which are kind of Nev clones.
Yeah.
So they give a nice warm tone. They give everything a warm tone. I like.
We used to have those in Soul Foundry. Ash had a couple of those.
Yeah, they're awesome. They're really
great
awesome.
on vocals,
and again,
too.
for the price too. For the price, they're badass.
They're only a couple $100 or something like that.
Yeah, like $250, sometimes $350 if you get them brand new, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and they sound fantastic on a vocal.
Absolutely. And then usually I run my snares through my Warm Audio WA12, which I believe are API clones. So they're really bright and crisp sounding. So because I really like a snappy snare drum, something cracked. So I usually toss them through there. And then on the toms, I'm usually using 57s or Sennheiser 609s actually. Again, for a cheap mic, I found 609s actually don't do too bad of a job. They don't
great on toms.
Yeah, they're all right. And they're low profile too. So that's another thing. If you have a drummer who's really keen on whacking things, usually
Yeah.
maybe I'll swap to a 609 so that they stop hitting it. But yeah, sometimes I'll use a crotched mic too. And I'll put maybe my Roswell MK47 down there, or even just a 57 if I don't if I don't feel like trusting the drummer. And I'll mic the ride with a 990, an MXL 990.
Oh, those are nice.
Yeah, and usually I don't end up using the track, but it's nice to hear it in the mix when I'm recording it. I don't know why. But and then the overheads, I'm usually running either a Warm Audio WA-14s or my OPR grills, which are ribbon mics. So if I have softer rock, stuff like that, then I'll use my ribbons as overheads, which usually get some pretty cool effects, I find. But yeah, other than that, that's usually how I do the drums.
That's
right
pretty cool. I like there's many schools of thought with miking drums as everybody knows.
There's not really a wrong answer.
There's not really. I know from a mixing standpoint, I'm very much a fan of miking everything.
Right.
Just because sometimes people will just do kick, snare, and a couple room or overheads or whatever.
Sure.
Which, I mean, that works too.
Definitely.
But then you run into a lot of problems if, someone's going crazy on the toms for some reason, and you either it's too loud because you have to have those overheads up, or they're not loud enough. But when you crank them, it also cranks everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always been a fan of miking everything. I'm
definitely. I agree.
What about you?
I'm
Jay?
actually I'm kind of on the other end of that. For me, I mic everything as far as the drums themselves go, but I don't usually run a hi-hat mic. I don't usually run a ride mic. Nope. It's just too much for me, and it's always, maybe it's the room that I'm in. But
that's everything. I mean,
right, for sure.
Knowing your room, you know what I mean.
But I just run 57s on the toms and snare, and I run a beta on the kick. Yep. I do a matched pair of Presidus pencil mics.
Oh, those are
for
nice.
overheads, and then I run a I recently bought a blue Spark SL thing. So one of these mics with the little neck and then the bulb on top.
Oh yeah.
And I run that for the room mic, and I just put that on the other end of the room. Wow. Yep, and that's it for my drums.
Wow.
With my kit, the kit that I have in my studio, it's just a high tom, a floor tom.
Yep.
And I get away with 6 mics.
That's all I use is one up, one down. That's what I've been for, God, ever since building birds, and maybe a little before that. That's what I use is one up and one down. Like, I never found myself to really need more than that until I decided to put my U2 influence into things and put one on the other side of the kit. So I had a floor tom on either side. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I found that was more for necessity than to be flashy, because there were certain parts where you couldn't get over there in time. So just having one right there was so much
easier. When I started out as a drummer, I was definitely more drums is better. We lost Anthony again.
Hopefully he'll come back. Yeah, I was that way too. I was very much.
Why?
Oh.
Don't understand why.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, folks. No, right. I was very much that way too in the beginning. Like, I gotta have all the drums and 15 cymbals and blah blah blah. Then I realized, who's gonna carry that?
There he is.
It's gonna be me. So
yeah, exactly.
That's when I started dumbing things down. Is when I realized I was the one that's gotta set it up and tear it down every show, and especially in a studio. Like, I like less, because you can actually, with less drums, I found it's easier for me to make them sound bigger. When I have less drums there, I can mix the ambience better and not have to worry about bleed as much, because there's not as many microphones going.
Sure.
I don't really have a
phase is what I worry about. That's why I go with less, because I fight with phase often.
Yeah.
And like one secret I was gonna give away here that actually Anthony taught me is the placement of my overheads. I used to just go like far left, far right, and point them down. But then I worked with Anthony one day and noticed that he was running overhead almost if the drummer's sitting here and snares in front of you here, he runs an overhead to the hard right, and then one kind of here, and then he's running a string to make sure that they're both lining up in the middle of the snare drum.
Yep.
Since I seen that, I do that every time, and I haven't needed a hi-hat or ride mic since then.
Right.
That's an old that's a Rolling Stones trick.
Right. Is that where it came from?
Yep, that's what Charlie
I can't
Watts,
remember the title of it anymore. Isn't it like Poor Man's Stereo or something that? Yeah. So if you don't have a matched set, you know, you can do that sort of thing, and it really helps. Just
if I remember right, that's how Charlie Watts would mic his kit in the studio.
I do notice that my signal is, you know, I get small signals because I don't, you know, I'm trying to record everything in at like -12, and sometimes with overheads even less, you know, maybe -18. But all I do is throw CLA drums on there, click it over to overhead, and that's it. Game's over.
Yep.
The CLA stuff is just.
I agree.
I cannot believe like still how good the CLA stuff is, and it's been around for years now, and I'm still like, I haven't heard many plugins that beat it yet.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard some that are just as good, but I haven't heard anybody top it yet, and they're just incredible.
I put so much time into learning how to use them, even when the newer stuff comes out. Like I'll test it out, you know what I mean? But then when I go back to doing the recording again,
it's
like,
when it's time to go to work.
I kind of already have a flow with this, so I'm sticking with it.
Well, and especially now that he put the mix up thing out, which is nice because it has the SSL EQ and compression and everything that's in the SSL plugin that they put out before.
Right.
But it's been modified and it's actually better, and it's like directly modeled from his E-Series console. And he put 2 compressors on it. It's got the standard SSL one, and then it's got the Blue 1176.
Oh yeah.
But it's actually modeled after his Blue 1176. So it's like, so if you have the plug-in version plus the mix-up, there are 2 different versions of it. So it's pretty cool. But yeah, for drums for me, in my studio I'm all MIDI currently, mostly. I mean, part of it's space, obviously.
Sure.
But I really just love combining it with Logic, and all the tones that Logic has in it. I really love how responsive it is. Like with the mesh heads and everything, Logic's MIDI stuff is so smart, I guess is the only term I know how to use for it, that you can do ghost notes and all these kind of crazy things that on a digital kit normally with, you know, just using the brain that comes with it would sound so artificial and hokey.
Definitely.
And I mean, but it really sounds like a live kit. And with their producer kit thing they have, it actually like it emulates an overhead mic. It emulates a room microphone. So you're able to do the overhead and room first, and then bring in all the little pieces like you would in a regular mix.
Yeah.
Which is really nice. When we did do drums in the studio, we were 57s on the toms, and the snare was always the wild card, depending on what we were recording, like what the project was, what kind of tone we wanted out of the snare. Because I found that 57s are great when the snare is really tight. Sure. But if you're going for a looser, like a Jeff Lynne style snare with the real open, lower resonance, like the 57. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like the 57 almost had a hard time picking up some of the frequencies to it.
Right.
And for the Building Birds record, we ended up using an SM58 for the snare drum. Yeah, and it was weird how well it worked, because I would think it'd have been catching all sorts of bleed because, you know, the round, it's a multi-directional.
Super cardioid.
Yeah, exactly. But it sounded phenomenal. And, you know, like we always say, there is no wrong way to do it. You know what I mean? Right. But yeah, that's what ours, we were mostly sure. I think we had the beta for the kick. And then what we would do is we would have that kick mic, and then I had this old, I think I still have it. Yeah, the old what are they called? Digital Reference, I think they're called.
Mm-hmm.
Drum mics, just these cheapo, you know, drum sets, mic sets you can get for $150 or whatever.
Yep.
Right.
I've used them before.
Yeah, they're not bad. We would take that and we would put it further back from the kit, but at kick drum level, so it would catch the echo of the hit. So you get the punch of the hit with the 57 with the beta in the head, and then you get the room sound of the kick drum from that one further back.
Cool.
And we would sometimes too, and it would depend on, because we were above the local like Jay is, it would depend on what's going on in the building that day.
Sure.
But when it was a quiet day, we would open the door to the studio, and our room mic we would actually place in the hallway.
Nice.
And it would almost give you this really cool drum verb where you don't really get a lot of the drum sounds. You know what I mean? It's not good for like the drums themselves. Yeah, it was great, yeah, great ambience mic. And so that's what we would do for miking drums.
Cool, yeah.
So yeah, I mean,
I've heard of using boundary mics on the bass drums too, and been wanting to look into exploring that in the future.
What blew me away is I watched this video by what's his name? Warren Hewitt, the Produce Like a Pro guy.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and they did this thing where they recreated Van Halen 1 with this kids rock band. They went to the original studio, they did it, and they mic'd everything and used all the same gear that they used for the original album. Alex Van Halen in the kick drum had 2 SM57s in the kick drum.
Really?
That was the kick drum. Yep.
Wild.
Yeah, but it gave him that really clicky, you know, attacky sound, you know.
I don't hate it.
No, me neither.
I don't hate it.
Whatever it takes.
Yeah. And so I know this is where we'll differ a lot too. I know for me, I'm about 80% in the box with the stuff that I do. I know, Tony, you're a lot more analog gear.
Yeah, I do use a lot of different mics and preamps, definitely.
And Jay, you're pretty much all in the box, right?
Yeah.
For the most part, yeah. So
I don't use outboard gear much at all.
And I mean, and that's the thing too. There's so many. There's so many different ways to do things, and all yield. It's just the way you know. You know
right.
What I mean?
Admittedly, I mean, the reason I have so much more analog is just because that's the progression from where I learned. You know,
sure.
Where I started was all analog, so for me, dipping the toes in the digital. I mean, I just now have gotten rid of my outboard mixer. I used to have a 16-channel mixer that I would use.
Nice.
And
I'm jealous
really
of that.
There's no point. There's no point though anymore. You know, there really wasn't a
Artists
point
like to see them.
Yeah, it was just
the
nice.
Visual.
And I didn't need that. I needed the room for other stuff now instead. So I was just like, well, I could nix this and then free up all that room. And shit, I had like another 24 chords afterwards also because of everything that had to be hooked up in such a catastrophic way. So it really saved me a lot of space, and it actually gave me a cleaner signal, I feel like, too, because obviously the mixer is going to add its own color to the sound. So once I got rid of that, I think it really solidified. I was like, yeah, I think I made the right choice. You know?
I'd like to get Jay. You have the controller, right? The Behringer. Didn't you at one time have the mixer controller?
Yeah, with the automated faders and stuff. Yeah.
I think I'd like to eventually get one. I'd like to eventually get one of those just to.
Oh, I
had the Prisonist one.
Yeah, because it's nice to have, you know, a physical.
Sure.
Because sometimes it's easier to get way more delicate physically than with the mouse.
Absolutely.
But yeah.
Well, I found myself still going to the keyboard and mouse even when I had the controller.
Yeah.
So it's like Anthony said, you go by what you're kind of what you're taught. Yeah. And I was taught on keyboard and mouse, and I don't know. I mean, I can use a controller, but I don't need to. I mean,
I was
just
taught,
another expense, and this is budget recording. You know what I mean?
Right. And I was taught on a board. Marshall at Reel to Reel had
talk about outboard gear, boy.
Right.
Still.
Oh yeah. Oh, I know.
He had a 16 channel, I think, and we were recording to ADAT. I learned on ADAT machines.
Right.
Nice.
That was my first as well.
So mixing, I mean, I didn't know much about plugins and all that kind of stuff back then, but the physical act of EQ and mixing I learned on a board. So
Nice.
going to the computer, like I figured it out, and it wasn't too terrible. But
Right,
part of me will
exactly.
always miss having that in front of me, buttons to mess with. You know, I
Right.
understand that it's just taking up space half the time, but you know, in a perfect world with a big budget, you know what I mean?
Right.
But
Well, in a perfect world, we've got a board that gives us the color that we're looking for, not just a color, but that color.
Exactly.
right. Well, and Ash
I
used to
mean,
have
in
a
the perfect
studio.
world, I'm working on a Neve console. You know what I mean?
Right.
I actually got to work on one. It was pretty cool. We had
I bet.
in the old cathedral studio that Ash used to have in Ohio. It was a Neve, and it's
Just
hard to
classic
be.
sounding.
Oh my god,
Just
half
classic.
of it didn't work,
Mm.
but the parts that did were awesome. We
Good
basically
enough.
we basically just used it as a preamp.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where we ran the stuff through that, but we didn't mix or anything on it. We just used it for the tones of it.
Mm-hmm. I get it.
But Neves are incredible. It's hard to. There's a reason they're the most expensive. Like
For sure.
they're insane. Now when it comes to vocals and recording stuff like that, Tony, what approach do you have when it comes to that side of things?
Well, you know, a lot of that will depend on the singer themselves. Obviously, when you've got some metalhead screamer guy, I usually go with the SM7B because, you know, that just, the range on it and the dynamics are pretty badass. You know, I've never really heard a bad scream in terms of the sonic quality of it. You know, the screamer might have been bad, but the microphone worked, damn it.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'll test it through either the preamps or sometimes just go through the Focusrite's preamps, depending again on the singer. I've used my Roswell MK47 a few times on vocals, and I actually, when I recorded Nosy Parker's EP with them,
fantastic job on that, by the way.
Thank you.
It
was awesome. They really came in and nailed it. Kayla's vocals, I think we tracked with my C12 clone.
Oh,
nice.
Yeah, and that's the only time I've ever done that, and that's because her voice obviously was much different than most of the stuff I'd worked with in the past. A lot of punk rock, my own voice, and then screaming.
Yeah. And my go-to mic for vocals a lot of times is this. I found this mic on Amazon of all places, and I've never even heard of it. It's like a Japanese, like Zingu or something like that. It was called, but they had these condenser mics that were all just getting like phenomenal reviews, you know what I mean? So I picked one up, and it's just your standard, you know, but it sounds fantastic. It was $20.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I mean, you have to use one of the what do you call them? The shields, because a cheaper mic, you're going to get a lot of reflections, especially in a big room. But when you put the shield behind it and you have a pop filter in front of it, it just sounds incredible. So I bounce between that and honestly a 58. I use a 58 a lot for my own vocals, just because that's where my voice sounds the best through.
Sure.
I want to get the mic that Jay has, and that's the next thing I think I'm going to be getting is the
Worker Bee.
Yeah.
How do you like that?
I think I actually sent Jay the link to that, didn't I?
Yeah.
How are you liking it?
I love it. It lives up to its name. I just recorded some acoustic guitar with it today.
Really?
And it was brilliant. Yes,
That's
it was
awesome.
Absolutely amazing. So far, everything that I've put it in front of, it sounded great for it.
And it's like what,
and
$70 or something?
I paid $79 for it.
Yeah.
Which is crazy because they're the same creators that made the Blue mics, which you were talking about earlier that you used. And their whole modus operandi was to make, similar quality at even better pricing. And I can't remember what happened, but like some sort of deal fell through or something. And so they're stuck with all these great quality microphones, but they're literally selling them for basically at cost. Wow. I mean, $99.
It's not just the Worker Bee. There's a couple others that I want to get my hands on. Queen Bee, yeah.
Bumblebee, yeah.
All just amazing reviews.
One for my son, yeah.
Yeah, they seem like they're fantastic.
The price can't be beat.
No.
Right. And I'm all about budget.
Honestly, I think the only reason they got a bad rap is just because of the actual like design of the mic. I'm talking like just the look. Like they made it black and yellow, and so most snobby people are just going to be like, "Oh, that's not a serious microphone. It looks like a child's toy."
Right.
Like, well, yeah.
I don't care what it looks like as long as it sounds good.
It does have a distinct look, but I don't really give a rat's ass, to be quite honest with you.
When you get it in your hand, it's you know immediately it's not a toy. As soon as you have it in your hand,
they're pretty heavy duty, right?
Absolutely. It weighs quite a bit. It feels like it's a recording microphone. I mean, it feels great.
Right.
Looks great. So you're right. There is a little bit of a stigma to, I mean, recording, artists want to see a certain thing. You know what I mean? They've got this visual of what a studio is supposed to look like, or what a recording room is supposed to look like. Like I get a lot of flack for not having a vocal booth, but and then when you explain that it's really not necessary anymore to have a vocal booth, and it's more for looks now, and or like we were just saying, wow, we got the time limit thing again, but. But like we were saying, and the board too. I've had questions of, well, why don't you have a board anymore? And it's like, well, because I don't need a board,
right?
And it's just something else that's in my way, or another distraction from my workflow. You know what I mean? And so,
you're pretty when it comes to vocals and stuff. You're pretty dry in the beginning process, aren't you?
Yeah, I run raw. If the artist can handle it, and and one of the most important parts of what we do for a living is getting the best performance out of an artist. So, with that being said, I do often have to run plugins through vocals, but I try not to. I want it raw. I want the artist to hear exactly what they sound like, not you know what I mean. And latency is a thing for me too. It's not always a thing for everybody, but I'm running with 8 gigs of RAM, so it just doesn't allow a whole lot of room for, like, if I've got a vocalist that's using a plugin, we'll say the CLA vocal plugins, because that's what we've been talking about. And if I use like the JST gain reduction plugin on it too, which is my usual go-tos for vocals, so that gets that out of the way for you. I usually run after the raw recording's done, I run the JST and the CLA plugins almost on every single vocal track I ever do, and I usually double, and then the second vocal track I'll run way low in the mix and have it with the crazy wicked delay or whatever, however I use
the John Lennon trick,
Yeah, exactly. But anyways,
hey, it worked for him. Good enough for him. It's good enough for anybody.
Right.
I've found that if I run those plugins while I'm recording a vocalist, it creates more latency. And first couple of takes is fine, but you get into take comp like 3, comp 4, and not only can the artist start to hear the latency, but eventually you get system crashes. So, I mean, that's all about budget recording, though. Anybody that's watching this, that's something you got to keep in mind, is if you're running a lower end computer, then you've got to keep up with the latency, because you'll end up, there's nothing more frustrating than a singer that is constantly singing out of time. Anthony's struggling with the weather down there. It looks like
it's ridiculous. I'm worried for my day tomorrow if it's going to be this crazy.
But yeah, that's a good point. Is really playing to the strengths of your gear. Because I ran into that problem a lot when I started doing my own recording. Back in 2017, it was like a 2009 iMac. So it was already old.
Right.
And it had 4 gigs of RAM on it.
Rip.
And I'm sitting there trying to run Logic on it with plugins, with, all this cracked garbage.
Oh, no.
It's screaming for you. Help!
Yes.
Yeah.
there was a lot of swears because it would constantly overload or, you know, buffering issues, latency.
Sure.
So yeah, definitely playing to the strengths of your rig is huge.
Yeah, or you're gonna piss somebody off.
Right.
You know,
Yeah,
and
there's
it's
nothing like ruining a good vibe, you know.
exactly. And when you're
Yeah.
charging
Happens to all
somebody
of us.
by an hour,
Right.
they want, you know, they're not wanting to watch you fiddle with your stuff.
Right.
Right.
You know, your system crashed. That's not their problem. You know.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's you know, it's a fun life we lead, kids.
So once the recording is done and it's time to get to the, well, what I call the fun part for us is the mix section of things. How do you guys approach that? Tony, do you want to go first?
Well, usually I go with the drums first, and I try to get the drums sitting well within itself. And once I get the kit, you know, EQ'd, compressed, reverb, room sound, whatever it needs, then, you know, then I start adding in everything else. Usually I add the guitars next if that's the focal melody maker for the music, you know.
Yeah.
And then, you know, after the guitars, I go with the bass. And then usually the vocalist or the synthesizer player, you know, is last in the ring. So,
do you have any go-to settings or gear or plugins that are like your mainstays? Like when you're doing a mix, like when you're setting up your workflow to get ready to start mixing, do you have things that you automatically drop in that you know you're going to use every single time?
Yeah, pretty much. With the drums, I'm usually using the API 560
API is
plugin.
fantastic.
Yeah, it always seems to just make the drums just fall right into
place. Do you use the A or the B?
I use the A.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes if I'm not getting the right sound actually for the toms, I will use the B. That's what I've noticed. Sometimes I'll say, hey, you know what, this A isn't sounding quite the same, so you try the B. I'm like, okay, there it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes even the 550, but usually it's the 560 that I end up going with the most.
I think I have the 50, the 550.
Yeah.
And
I got them in that gold, in the Waves gold thingy. So I have
Nice.
most of them, yeah. And that's usually it. Sometimes with the overheads, I'll also use the API 2500, the compressor there, I think, and that usually does pretty cool tricks for me. And yeah, that's usually what the drums are for. And then guitar, that's different. It's been different every time, honestly.
Yeah.
It's something that usually just depends so much on the player. But one thing that usually I do is we've all heard of the Friedman technique, right? One on axis, one off axis.
Yes.
I usually cram these suckers as close to the speaker as I can get. Push that grill in, baby. I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, if I'm feeling froggy or if we're having a lower, more, you know, clean tone type of player, I'll put my OPR grill ribbon mics up there too, about 6 inches or maybe even 10 inches, depending on how dynamic they're going to play. You know, because again, there's no real set length from the speaker. It's all just about what sounds good that day in the room. But there's generally a variety
to play with too.
Yeah. So you know, that's usually what I do. And then bass, usually I'll just run if the bassist has a rig that they really like their tone of, which I usually hope is like an Ampeg. Then I'll run the direct out of that. And I'll also run direct into one of my preamps, just for an extra one in case, and maybe blend them or maybe just use one or the other.
I'm a very big fan of amp and direct at the same time.
Yeah, me too.
You know, that
absolutely.
way you have a separate signal that should something, God forbid, happen to the mic'd amp signal you have, or you just can't get that sound you want, you have another of the exact same that you can reamp and do whatever you want to and boost that sound even better.
Is something that I've really started to come to understand is like
same.
It's such a time saver, really. You know, I have sometimes depending on the project, I'll just have them go direct into my preamps or right into the interface, and then they can leave after they've done their good job, and then I can reamp it after they're gone.
Yes.
And get it that way. That way,
nobody's
sitting around, fiddling around, waiting for me to place the microphones. Okay, play it again. Nope. Move it over half a centimeter.
Yeah.
That way, you know.
That's what I love to do, especially for guitars. I love to have whoever's playing. I kind of went crazy on the guitar plugins a little bit, but mostly because that's the instrument I find that you need the most variety for.
Okay.
Because there's so many different players and different styles and different, you know, the tone of the guitar can really change the meat of the whole song depending on what you're doing.
Right.
So I like to have the guitar player, I'll plug direct into the interface, and we'll sit there for a good half hour even sometimes, finding a tone that he likes enough. That's not the finished tone, but like that it's in the neighborhood so he can play and express, you know, he can give the best performance that he wants. And then later I go in and tweak it and, you know, mess with the settings, and because getting a vibe and a good performance is key. And if the stuff sounds awesome right out the chute, you're gonna get you're not getting to mic a lot of stuff, but you're gonna get a better performance too. You know what I mean?
Builds confidence in the player.
Yeah.
If I can get away with not miking cabs and stuff, then I will. I mean, I'd DI everything if I could.
Same.
I mean, artists aren't interested in that, but
yeah, and for my own personal stuff, I have guitar amps. I have a couple vintage Fenders that I use that I love, that I'll run in stereo a lot of the time. And my main go-to mic for that is just it's a Shure, what is it? The PG56.
Okay.
It's just a little, you know, little guy.
Yep.
But it got it super cheap, and I got it for the purpose of possibly a drum mic, but it sounds incredible on guitars. So
yeah, those would work on a tom, wouldn't they?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
But a lot of times I find myself more and more, even though I have the amps and everything, I find myself going to the box more and more anymore, because amp simulators have gotten so sophisticated. And like I got the Paul Reed Smith amp simulators, which
I seen you post about that.
Oh my God, they're recreations of the actual physical amps, like the circuitry and everything, and you can set your amp cabinets after the fact, and you can put where you want the microphones to be, on axis, off axis, which speaker you want them in front of, how far away from it. It's crazy, and it sounds fantastic. You know, that and the CLA guitar plugin, I've also found the reamps of those sound incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times I go to that more than I do my gear. But for me, drums, I'm usually going through SSL. The SSL, the regular, was it the G series? I can't remember. The red knobs.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. That's usually what's on my drums. Every drum gets that except for the hi-hat. I find the API is awesome on a hi-hat, and the overheads. The overheads I'll switch between the two depending on what flavor it is. You know what I mean? And then a lot of times that's it. I let the room mic and the overheads really give me my reverb. I try to put as little verb on drums as possible, because I don't want the attack to get lost and swimming in reverb. You know what I mean? So I try to let
enough to give it the glue.
Right. Yeah. And I also try to avoid compression as much as I can on the drums too.
No clue.
I also try to avoid compression as much as possible with the drums. I mean, sometimes you can't help it. But the only time I usually use compression is on the drum bus. So like on the overall, if I still don't have quite that glue I want, no matter how much I've turned knobs and moved things, I'll toss a bus compressor on that. And a lot of times still I go to Slate has some really fantastic compressors that I use.
Yeah, I agree.
The FG series is just amazing, and I'll use that a lot. But I find myself, when I get plugins and stuff, I treat the plugins I'm getting like I'm getting outboard gear, if that makes sense.
No, I try to, what it is.
Yeah, I try to get a set of plugins that play together.
Yeah.
So I have different flavors altogether depending on how the song is. So like the Slate Digital stuff, for example, is analog, is the most analog plugins you'll ever hear sound wise. They're amazing analog duplication. So if I'm doing something that's supposed to have more of a retro, maybe a 70s feel or something, I'll mix with nothing but Slate plugins because they have that raw analog sound to them.
An old school feel.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And then other stuff is mostly waves. And I find some other fun stuff too once in a while, like in the free plugins that you're like, hey, what's this thing? Oh, that's cool, you know.
Right.
But my vocal usually is the one that doesn't usually change much, and that's usually it's an SSL through into an 1176 into the CLA vocal plugin. I found that chain just really seems to make the vocals pop really well for me. In 1176, you can put that thing on almost anything, and it's going to sound incredible. They really they knocked it out of the park when they invented that thing. But that's the only thing that's always a variable is like you, Tony, is the guitars.
Yeah.
Guitar is always the one that's a wild card for me. Bass, I'm usually always direct. And I mean, I hate to keep using the same dude's name, and it's usually the CLA bass plugin I throw on it, or the Kramer.
He's very, very rich, so it's okay.
Yeah.
You can.
Right. Or the Kramer HLS, the Helios plugin.
Nice.
I saw Andrew Sheps use it on some videos before, and he showed a way to really make the bass pop with it. And I paused the YouTube video and like jotted down the way he had it set up and set mine all the same way, and it works. I mean, you got to tweak stuff once in a while, but I find that I use presets a lot, but I use them as a starting point.
Right. So
like when I'm mixing the drums, the kick drum always gets the CLA kick on the SSL. Like go to the SSL on the presets and the CLA kick, and then I tweak that because I always like my kick drum to have a really great like whack to it. You know what I mean? It's not so much about the low end thud for me as it's about the attack of the note. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sure.
And especially when you have the bass and the drums working together, the bass guitar will help fill out that low end thud you want. So that's
and it's all genre specific, of course.
Absolutely. Right. And that's usually where I spend the most time on a mix for me. And I think it's because I'm a drummer, so I'm just biased, but is on the rhythm section, is the drums and the bass. I will. No,
I don't think it's biased. I just think that
I feel like that's everybody.
Drums are just, there's a lot to it, you know. It's harder to get drums all to play well and sit nicely together versus the guitars, where honestly, with the Friedman technique, especially for harder rock metal guitars, it sounds fantastic immediately for me, you know. So it doesn't really require me to do a whole lot of brain thinking, you know. But the drums, sometimes I'll have a mix going with the drums, I'm like, yes, and then they'll change to the chorus beat, and then they'll hit in the crash, and I'm like, shit.
Yeah.
It's like, okay. So the drums definitely, I think that was like the most intimidating for me when I first started, was how am I supposed to do this, you know?
Yeah. I found the more I do it, the more I'm turning the overheads down more than anything else on the kit.
Well, especially the more if you are miking all of the time, if you're miking all the toms and blah, blah, then the overheads don't really need to do as much work,
right?
As they would.
The bleed will go through all those mics anyway, so you'll have a bunch of overhead.
And I found that's where you run into the most problems with transients and with like weird phase issues, is if you have the cymbals too loud and they're crashing through everything. It throws your whole mix out of whack. Whereas I like
kills the dynamic.
Yeah, and I'm finding the older I get anyway, the more I like the Jeff Emmerich approach, where the cymbals they're there, but they're sprinkles. They're not the star of the show.
Right.
You know what I mean? They're there just
to
give
sit
that
a little bit back.
Yeah, they're there to give that extra lift. They're not there to be like, hey, here we are, And you
in your face.
Right. And you hear so many mixes, even professional ones still.
Sure.
Where the cymbals are just so in your face. And
You know, it's funny you say that, you know, and I agree 100%, because when you hear those mixes and then they're converted to the MP3s, those are the cymbals that just, they're so offensive to me. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
Oh, sweet mother of God. Whereas, you know, you tuck them back a little bit more and they're less apt to sound quite as terrible when it goes through the MP3 or streaming process, where, you know, the downgrade of quality is kind of substantial in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's
I feel like we live. Go ahead, Todd.
No, you're good.
I was gonna say, I feel like we live in a time when people feel like there needs to be a compressor on every instrument, including every piece of the drum.
Right.
So what you end up with is compressed compression.
Yeah.
So then after you compress again into MP3, you get from your cymbal when it, you know, and I think people over compress. I think that's a huge problem.
I was guilty of that.
Even in pro recording, the stuff you hear on the radio is over compressed.
Yeah. Well, like I always like to approach my stuff more like I don't have the technology to make it perfect, if that makes sense.
No, I get it.
You know, I like to approach it like, how would this sound with a bunch of people in a room? Like, I want the person listening to the record to feel like they're sitting in the room with the band or musician that you're hearing.
Like the record is a time and a place. You know? And when you're there,
you're capturing a moment. You know what I mean? And the record I just finished, which comes out next month, cheap plug, is someone named Hunter Holiday, which Jay, you might know her, Hunter O'Connell. She's
I've heard the name.
Yeah, she's a great, really like jazzy, like jazzy folk. Tony, you got to hear it.
Yeah, I listened to it.
And she had some players, man. She had Rich Small playing guitar and Kill Bill on bass, and oh man, it was just.
It's always a joy working with musicians that know what they're doing.
Yeah, and Ash engineered the record, and then I mixed and mastered it, and that was such a pleasure to mix because it was just amazing players, and so I was able to really sit back and really create the space of a room instead of the space of a song. You know what I mean? I wanted it to feel like, and I think I said this to Tony, like I wanted to feel like you're sitting in a jazz club with a bourbon, listening to a band. You know what I mean? And I think that's a really cool job that we get to have in the studio, and what makes working in the studio for me actually more fun than playing shows and stuff like that is we get to create like just amazing things. You know what I mean? We get to like sound is our playground, and we can make things sound however the hell we want to.
Sure.
I mean, you can't do that in a live show. I mean, you can try, but you're gonna
you can capture the live feel, but yeah, I get what you're talking about. I get what you're talking about.
I mean, not everybody's Trent Reznor. He can do it, but you know.
Yeah. Well,
But hey, hooray for tracks! But yeah, I love the idea of the studio, and the mix engineer is just another member of the band.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's our job after the artist has recorded their stuff and kind of given us the input of how they want it to feel. Now it's up to us to interpret it.
Right.
And hopefully put out something that they can say, wow, this is exactly how I envisioned it. You know what I mean?
But with that being said, mix with the band.
Yeah, absolutely. I am a big fan of having the band. What I like to do is I like to do like a rough on my own, where I'll get it where I think, it sounds pretty cool. And then I like to bring the band in, play it, or the artist or whoever, play it for them, and then go, okay, what would you like to hear now? Like, here's how it is, like how I've got it. What are you hearing different? What changes would you like to make? And kind of have them very involved on the final, because it is their art after all.
The other option is 6 revisions, and then you're playing email tag. You know what I mean? And
that's what I wanted to actually bring up was a lot of artists that are going to be going the budget recording route, whether you're going to a budget studio or doing it yourself. Really, they don't realize some of what goes into this, And so, what am I trying to say here?
I think I know where you're going, but I don't know how to say it either.
Yeah, I'm like grappling for the words, but it's like sometimes I just have to say, listen, you haven't really researched the sound that you are looking for. You don't know the language that you're trying to speak. Yeah. I do know the language, so you'll have to trust me. Yeah. I guess that's the thought process that was going through my mind.
No,
and sometimes that works for the artist, and sometimes
it doesn't.
And sometimes you have to approach it the other way, like you said, and have the band very involved. I've had it both ways. Specifically when I work with hip hop and rap, those guys trust me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, they don't want me sending them messages every half an hour being like, tweak this, what do you think? Most of the time they're like, hey, I trust your skills. Let me know when mix 1 is done.
Yep.
You know, but with the rock and roll bands, they're definitely a little bit more, what do I want to say? Because I don't want to use the term involved, because it's not that they're more involved, but and I don't want to even say nitpicky, because I'm not trying to give you a negative context.
I think a good term is they're a little more cautious.
Maybe even maybe they've thought about that part of the art a little bit more than a hip hop or a rap artist has to.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Because most of the time
instrumentals are typically built for them already.
Exactly.
So they don't have to bother with snare drum sound and stuff. It's just a mix between the vocals.
That stuff is most of the time mixed very well before they even step foot into the booth here. You know what I mean? Usually I have the tracks all ready, everything EQ'd and ready for a voice to go over it. Whereas, with the rock and roll band, they're definitely, every couple of days they're like, so how's this? Well, and they'll give me the list of things that they, with that mix. And it's like, yes. So, sometimes that can even get a little stale, because you're like, hey, I've done enough.
Yeah.
You've got to let go of the control and realize that you came here. So let's work together. It's not just, like you said, it's not just their vision anymore. We're that fifth member or whatever, however people are in the band.
And at the end of the day, your name's on the record too.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? So it has to be something that you are also proud of, or at least that you
want my name on.
Right. That you did the best job you can.
The best job you can, for sure. But I've definitely recorded music that I wasn't going to take home and jam.
Oh, no, that's different. But I'm sure at the same time, you gave them the best quality you possibly could.
Oh, you're damn right I did.
Right. That's what I'm talking about. Not so much musical genre, but you put together a mix and a product sonically that has your stamp.
Acceptable.
Yeah. Like, I'm not a big country guy, but if I get a country artist that wants to sound like Garth Brooks, I'll bust my ass till it does. You know what I mean? It might not be my jam, but damn, be sure I'm going to do the best I can.
You know what a country artist that sounds anywhere near Garth Brooks.
Right.
You send him my way. I want to meet him.
We'll share, all three. But yeah, like, and that's the thing too, is that I can't stress enough, and hopefully, I'm sure, I hope people that are wanting to get into this kind of thing watch this stuff. Is do your homework also on the person you're going to hire to mix your stuff.
Right.
And record your stuff. Reach out to that person. Say you want to hire Tony, Jay or I, reach out to one of us and ask for samples of stuff that we've done.
Absolutely.
Ask for, show me some mixes that you're proud of, so we can show you what we're capable of doing. So when it comes time for you to have that record mixed and put together, you already know that person
what to expect
is in the capable hands of the person you hire. Because there's also nothing that takes the energy out of a mixer's life than 900 revisions on the same part.
Right.
Because you just can't let go enough to let them do what they're good at,
Sure.
And that's not a knock at anything, because I understand that the art and the music, it's your baby. I get it.
Very passionate.
I get it. I mean, my last record, I took a year to make the damn thing, and I took 5 months mixing it. I get it. But at the same time, when you have multiple members in a team, you gotta throw somebody the ball.
Right.
you have to throw that ball and you have to trust that they're going to get the touchdown with it.
Yep.
You just have to. Otherwise, it's going to take forever.
Otherwise, it'll never get done. That's what'll happen.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times, and luckily I haven't really had this experience myself, but a lot of the times, you know, when a band gets really caught in that black hole of trying to get the perfect record, they don't ever actually finish the damn thing. It creates so much turmoil within the band that they break up half the time.
Oh yeah, they say, I've heard before that if you make it through your first recording,
right,
you know, your first recording sessions as a band, then you can stand the test of time, because
exactly
a recording session will make or break a band.
It will.
It's true.
They get in there bickering about each other, about, oh, you're not on the click, or that's not the tone you played last time, and next thing you know, they're not only do they not finish the record, but they're not out on the road anymore. They're not even a band anymore.
They done split.
Yeah. Well, the best analogy I think I've ever heard, Marshall told me years and years ago, that there's a trilogy of things, and it's three things when it comes to an end product. There's fast, cheap, and good. You can only have 2 of 3.
Right.
So if you want to mix good and you want it fast, it won't be cheap. If you want it fast and you want it good, it won't. You know what I mean?
Yep.
There's quality, and there's, you know, you have to invest your time in everything.
Right.
And not be impatient with the people creating the stuff too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you can have it, you know, you can have it fast and good, but it's gonna be expensive as hell.
Right.
Or you can have it, you know, cheap.
I've done it all 3 of those ways. I've done it all 3 of those ways.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And they all work, but you gotta. You gotta realize what you're signing up for when you do it.
sometimes the fast and the cheap left a little bit of a sour taste in the mouth, but you know.
Yeah.
That's like, for me, with my prices and for recording, I leave myself so wide open, because like you said, there's fast, there's cheap, or there's good, and you can only have 2. Well, in my situation, I charge $100 for 6 hours.
Okay.
And that's including mixing. So I basically am mixing for free.
Right.
So what that ends up with is, I'm going to do this good and cheap, right?
Right.
So it's going to take time, and it's going to be on my time.
Right.
You know what I mean? So there's this, it's rough, because I have to be able to meet this budget for this artist. But at the same time, you know, it takes time to do these things. And people think we just sit down and throw some EQs on a mix and the game's over, and that's not how it works. So you're right. You have to find a middle ground a little bit. And I will never release a track to an artist that I'm not happy with.
Right.
So it's got to be, you know, you got to find the middle ground. I can't give you 6 hours in the studio and 6 hours mixing for $100.
No.
That's not a thing that can be done.
No.
So, you know, you gotta figure it out.
Communication is everything.
Right.
Yeah.
It really is, you know.
Well, with a budget recording like what we're doing, the more prepared the artist is, the easier it goes for everybody, because the more prepared the artist is, if I can say, come in halfway through the second verse, and you know what note you're starting on, you know what the downbeat is, you know what I mean? Like, then punching in becomes a breeze.
Yeah.
But if these guys, well, I kind of need the vocals if I can do this, then you start to run into problems. Well, you know, then we have to start from the very beginning of the verse in order to punch.
And you don't know your song very well, guy.
Exactly. And then you run into, well, now the band's wasted 4 hours trying to remember how many times they repeat a riff in the verse. And you say to yourself, my goodness, I don't want to waste your time, but here you are, you know, 4 hours of kind of where we're all just kind of, you know. That's when I whip out my switch and pass it around. I'm like, here, let's get this started.
I got a really good example of that, actually. I just spoke with the band the other day about recording, and I talked to the band leader, as all bands have.
Sure.
And he says, oh yeah, I said, you know, I'll give you 6 hours for $100. And He's like, oh yeah, we could probably get a few tracks done in that time. I said, no, you won't. I said, so what songs are you really, really, really good at? And he's like, oh, well, we've got 2 that we've got perfect. And I'm like, cool. So pick one of those 2 and get it more perfect.
Right.
And then come in the studio and get it done.
Yep.
Right.
And he's like, oh, so it'd be 1 song in 6 hours. Yes.
Right.
And we'll
But still,
probably have to talk about a second session. Like,
still,
that doesn't happen in a minute, you know?
But still,
Right.
you're getting a song mixed, mastered, recorded, everything for $100.
Right.
Where the hell are you gonna get that anywhere else? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
You can't even they can't
like
do it themselves for $100 worth of gear.
No.
You know?
like me personally, I kind of go on a case by case basis as to, like, that's why I don't put my prices like on my site or anything.
Mhm.
But what you're doing, Jay, it's amazing, and I don't understand why people wouldn't take advantage of that in that sense. Like, if I knew I had 6 hours for $100, I would take that 6 hours to get that song sounding like something that's going to be on the damn radio.
Yeah.
Right.
Because any big
And if you're
budget
good, if
studio
you've got
is-
that song down, then you can come in, record, and mix in 6 hours. It can be
Right.
done.
Yeah, because
Right.
anybody in a major studio, you're not getting that same thing for less than $2,000.
Right.
No. Yeah.
It's just not happening. It's just not
Right.
happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know.
And that's why we do what we do. I mean, all 3 of us,
Right,
that's
I
why
agree.
we, you know,
Yep.
is because we all seen an issue in the industry where I mean, I'm recording, and Anthony does too. Anthony's
Mhm.
got really cheap rates too.
Yep,
And so do
me
you,
too.
Todd.
Mhm.
But we're recording under our means in many
Absolutely,
ways.
it's passion
Uh-huh. Oh,
projects
yeah.
for us.
Yes,
It's
yes.
a passion,
So
but we also want to make sure that we're still compensated for our time, because that's
absolutely.
it's fair. You know what I mean?
For sure.
You know, if I, you know, do a whole session with a band and I can't even afford to, you know, fill my car with gas and go get a cheeseburger, something's messed up.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
you know, with all this gear that we all have, you have to justify it. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
And
Wear and
No.
tear on it, if nothing else. I mean, I can't
Absolutely.
tell you how many times I've had to, you know, get my guitars, you know, the neck truss rod adjustments because people have dropped them, I'm sad to
Yeah.
say.
yeah,
Microphones have been knocked over.
Mhm.
Caps have been completely knocked off of, you know, microphones that cost more than the entire session.
hmm
You know,
Oh.
It's like a rental car.
yeah,
It's like
exactly.
a rental car. When you get a rental car, you treat it like shit. You know, I
Yep,
mean,
yep.
and people, it's not theirs, and it's not theirs, and they're paying for it.
My
Yep.
So it's,
favorite
you know,
my favorite thing we always used to do, and Ash was when I started doing this, is we would loan a piece of gear to somebody, right? And they would say, "Well, don't worry, I'll treat it like my own." And we always say, "No, treat it like it's ours.
yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
Don't treat it like your own. I don't know how you treat your stuff. Pretend
Right.
what I'm giving you is very
yeah.
fragile."
My livelihood.
Right. You
Right.
know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Because
setback.
friends will
if I
ask to
lose a
borrow
mic.
yeah.
Mhm.
Friends will ask to borrow a microphone, and I'm like, you don't understand. I'm not in a position where I have a locker full of microphones.
You know?
Right.
Every microphone I have has its purpose.
Yep.
And if an artist comes in and I need that microphone, then now it's really my livelihood. It really
Right.
is. It's not a joke, you know. It's
This is what we do for, this is what we do.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
And now after Corona, it's looking like I might do just this. So
Yeah. Wow.
you know,
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't got.
well, we'll
Yeah.
see how nice it is.
Hey,
It's
it's
yet to be
looking nice from
determined.
over here, boy. I haven't had one yet, so we'll see.
Right.
Right. I hate that Anthony. People call Anthony. Go and see him because
Yeah,
he's got a
go
killer
ahead.
studio.
I dare you.
Mhm. And that's the thing. I think, with that, I think we'll wrap it up today. But yeah, definitely get on Facebook and check out all of our studios.
Mhm.
Pickle City
Strike up a
Studio.
conversation.
Yeah. And
For
yeah,
sure.
strike up a conversation with us. If there's anybody that's watching this that is in home recording themselves, drop us a line. Get in on the conversation with us.
Yeah,
Join
for
us
sure.
on the next episode. Sit in.
And
with
I
us
know
and
for all
have
three of
fun
us,
with
it's the same. For all three of us, it's the same. If you've got a track that you're working on and you can't, is the snare too loud? Is the space? throw it by us, all three of us.
Absolutely.
I know that we'll listen and we'll give critique and we'll do our best to help you in any way we can.
And we, you know, that's the nice thing. We have a great network of artists here with the three of us. You know, we're always now bouncing stuff around each other. So, you know, if you need anything like that, you got three people right here who are more than happy to take time out of their day to help. That's what this whole series is about, is helping. You know, we'd like to get business and we'd like people to record with us and everything. Don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, I'd like to think we're helping to create more artists and more people doing this and more people recording and more people mixing. And you know,
I just want to hear more tunes. That's my angle. I want to hear more tunes.
Yep.
Music changes things, man. Music changes people. It changes everything. It can take you from angry to sad in a heartbeat. There's nothing more powerful in the world.
It is the one thing in the world of an art form that will never die, ever.
Yeah.
Music has been part of the subconscious of the world since the beginning of time, and it always will be.
Greatest invention of man.
It's the most powerful thing, man, in my opinion. You know. So we'd like to thank you for joining us on this episode.
Blast.
We'll see you guys in a couple weeks here, and please make sure to visit the Facebook websites. I'll put the links to that at the end of the video here for you to get on Facebook and check out Vehicle City Studio, Flatland Audio Recording, and myself in the back room. And thanks to Jay and Tony for joining me tonight.
Yeah.
And we will see you all soon on the next episode. And see y'all soon.
Later.
Be safe, everybody.